I kept my hand on the control cabinet while the horn rolled closer, louder now, pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. Linda stepped forward and planted herself even firmer across the rails, heels locked, chin up, like she could stare down 10,000 tons of steel. The crossing light strobed across her white jacket, red flashes cutting through the gray morning. Someone behind her yelled again. Another driver laid on his horn. It all blended into one rising wall of noise, but underneath it, the track vibration stayed steady, precise, on time. That was the part she still did not understand. Trains do not argue. They do not negotiate. They follow signals. I glanced at the signal mast again. Solid red. Occupied block. The train had already committed. Linda waved her phone toward me, still recording, still narrating like she was winning something. "You see this," she said loudly, panning across the stopped cars. "This is what happens when people ignore community authority." The word authority hung in the air like something fragile. I watched the chain she had looped through the gate. Cheap hardware store steel. Tight, but not built for what was coming. The bell kept ringing. Faster now. A sharper edge to it. The bus driver moved farther back, pulling a couple of kids with him. A delivery driver shut off his engine and stepped out, eyes fixed on the bend in the tracks. Even the wind felt different, like it was being pulled forward. Linda did not step back. She pointed at the rails again and shouted that no train had clearance. I let that sit there for a second. Clearance. She thought clearance came from her. From a board vote. From printed rules and monthly dues. She had no idea the clearance had already been granted miles away, locked into a schedule, confirmed by signals she could not see. I reached into my pocket and turned the small brass key between my fingers. Cold. Familiar. The kind of weight you forget is there until it matters. The horn hit again, this time close enough to rattle the chain on the gate. Linda flinched. Just a fraction. Then she squared her shoulders and doubled down, shouting into her phone that she would have the entire railroad sighted. I stepped away from the cabinet and moved toward the side path that ran parallel to the tracks. Gravel crunched under my boots. The vibration grew stronger with every step. The front of the locomotive began to appear through the trees, dark steel cutting through the morning haze. The engineer inside had already seen the obstruction. I knew the sequence by heart. Horn. Brake pressure. Signal confirmation. There was no confusion on that end. Only procedure. Linda finally turned fully toward the train, her voice losing its rhythm for the first time. The red lights washed over her face again, faster now, almost frantic. I walked past the last parked car and stepped onto the ballast beside the rails, raising one hand in a signal that was not meant for her. The locomotive slowed, but it did not stop. It could not stop here. Not with the block occupied and the crossing compromised. Linda looked from the train to me, something shifting behind her eyes as the scale of it started to register. I pulled the radio from my vest and clipped it on. Static hissed for a second. Then the channel opened. The engineer's voice came through, calm, controlled, waiting for confirmation. I did not answer right away. I just watched Linda standing there, framed by flashing red lights and a locked gate she thought she controlled. She was finally looking at the system she tried to override. The radio cracked again, sharper this time, the engineer waiting on my call while the locomotive rolled closer through the curve, steel grinding low against steel. I could feel the weight of it in my boots, steady and unavoidable. Linda took a step back without realizing it, her heel slipping slightly on the painted line, but she caught herself and straightened up like pride alone could hold the crossing in place. "You need to stop that train right now," she shouted at me, her voice thinner now, stretched by something she could not control. I did not answer her. I raised the radio to my mouth and gave a short, clear confirmation, my voice cutting clean through the static. The response came back instantly. Procedure locked in. No hesitation. The locomotive's horn blasted again, so close now. It shook the chain on the gate hard enough to make it rattle against the metal post. The flashing lights painted everything red in sharp pulses. Linda turned fully toward the train, and this time she did not speak right away. Her phone dipped slightly in her hand. Around her, people had started moving back without being told. Doors slammed. Engines went quiet. Even the air seemed to pull away from the tracks. She looked at me again, searching for something different, something she could still control. "You cannot bring that through here," she said, but the certainty was gone. I stepped onto the edge of the ballast and held my position, one hand resting on the radio, the other loose at my side. The locomotive came into full view now, massive and steady, its headlights cutting through the haze and locking onto the crossing like it had done 1,000 times before. This was not a moment. This was a system moving exactly the way it was built to move. The engineer leaned slightly forward in the cab, eyes fixed, hands already working the controls with practiced precision. I could see the brake application beginning, subtle but real, the train responding in long, controlled increments. Not stopping. Never stopping here. Linda finally saw it. Not just the train, but the scale of it. The distance it needed. The momentum already committed. She looked down at the chain she had wrapped around the gate, like it might somehow change what was coming. It did not. The bell kept ringing. Faster now. Urgent. I took a step closer to the crossing and spoke again into the radio, my words short, exact, confirming the obstruction and the gate condition. The reply came back calm, almost routine. Because to the system, it was routine. That was the part she had missed from the start. She had treated this like a neighborhood dispute. A rule she could enforce. A space she could manage. But this line did not belong to her. It never had. The locomotive closed the final stretch, the ground vibrating hard enough now to ripple dust along the asphalt. Linda backed up another step, this time not even trying to hide it. The chain snapped tight against the gate as the wind from the approaching engine pushed forward, carrying the smell of diesel and hot metal across the crossing. She looked at me one more time, her voice barely holding together. "Who do you think you are?" she asked, like the answer might still change something. I let the silence sit for a second, just long enough for the horn to echo off the houses behind us. Then I reached into my vest again, pulled out the key, and started walking toward the side ladder of the locomotive as it slowed through the crossing, my boots hitting the gravel in steady rhythm. That was when she finally understood she had stopped the wrong line. I grabbed the side rail as the locomotive eased into the crossing, metal groaning under controlled pressure, the whole machine alive beneath my hand. The engineer cracked the cab door open just enough, eyes on me, waiting. I held up the key. That was all he needed. He nodded once and shifted over. I climbed the ladder in 2 quick steps, boots hitting steel, heat rising through the frame into my palms. Behind me, the horn cut again, shorter now, controlled, a warning with purpose. I stepped into the cab and the world changed. The noise outside dulled. Inside, it was gauges, switches, and the steady hum of power running through the system. I slid into position and set my hand on the throttle, feeling the vibration through the handle like a pulse. Linda was still there, smaller now through the glass, standing in front of a machine she could not command. The chain on the gate snapped tight again in the wind as the locomotive rolled forward, slow but unstoppable. I eased the throttle just enough to maintain momentum, nothing aggressive, just steady movement through a space that was never hers to control. The crossing lights flashed faster as we entered, red washing across the hood of her SUV and the asphalt beneath it. People had cleared back now, a wide gap opening on both sides. Phones were up. No one was shouting anymore. They were watching. That kind of silence only shows up when people realize something real is happening. Linda stepped backward again, this time all the way off the rail, her posture breaking as the engine filled her view. She looked up at me through the cab window, her expression caught between anger and something closer to disbelief. I kept my eyes forward. The procedure mattered more than the moment. Wheels over crossing. Maintain speed. Clear obstruction. The front of the locomotive passed the gate, inches from the chain she had wrapped around it. It shuddered hard, metal rattling against metal, but the train held its line. I felt the resistance for half a second through the frame, then it gave. Not broken. Just overpowered. The gate jerked open enough for the engine to clear. The system adjusted. It always does. I kept the throttle steady and guided the locomotive through the crossing, every movement precise, measured, exactly the way it was designed. Linda stood to the side now, her phone hanging loose at her side, recording nothing but her own mistake. The bus driver had his hands on his head. The delivery driver just stared. The red lights kept flashing even as the engine moved past her position, marking the crossing like a warning that had been ignored too long. I reached for the radio and gave a clean update, voice even, confirming the crossing was being cleared and traffic was held. The response came back without delay. Everything was being logged. Everything always is. I glanced once more toward Linda as the locomotive moved beyond her, the rest of the train following in long, heavy segments, each car pulling through the space she tried to shut down. That was when the first patrol car lights flickered at the far end of the road, cutting through the morning haze. The locomotive cleared the crossing, but the rest of the train kept coming, each car dragging the moment longer than Linda expected. The red light still flashed, steady and relentless, reflecting off her SUV and the line of stalled traffic behind her. I kept one hand on the throttle and the other near the radio, eyes tracking the mirrors as the cars rolled through in a slow, controlled chain. Outside, the patrol car lights grew brighter, blue and red cutting across the gray morning like a second signal system arriving late but loud. Linda noticed them too. Her posture shifted again, shoulders tightening, head turning between the passing train and the approaching officers like she was trying to decide which reality to face first. The chain she had wrapped around the gate hung twisted now, half pulled loose, clinking against the metal post with every vibration from the passing cars. It looked smaller than it had 10 minutes ago. Most things do when they meet something built to outlast them. I keyed the radio and gave another update, clear and exact, confirming the crossing was occupied and law enforcement was on scene. The response came back immediate. Everything logged. Everything time-stamped. That part matters more than people think. The bus driver had moved his passengers farther back. A few of them stood on the shoulder, phones raised, capturing angles that would not need much explanation later. The delivery driver leaned against his van now, arms crossed, no longer angry, just watching the situation settle into something real. Linda took a step toward the crossing again, like instinct was pulling her back into control, but she stopped halfway when another freight car rolled past, its steel sides blocking her view and reminding her how little control she had left. One of the officers stepped out of the patrol car, adjusting his hat, scanning the scene before locking onto the crossing, then onto her. He did not rush. He did not need to. Situations like this explain themselves if you let them. The second officer stayed by the cruiser, speaking into his shoulder mic, likely confirming what dispatch already knew from the calls coming in. Linda lifted her phone again, but her voice did not carry this time. The confidence had thinned. She started explaining something to the officer before he even reached her, words moving fast, hands pointing at the gate, the sign, the tracks, trying to rebuild authority in real time. The officer glanced once at the passing train, then back at her, his expression steady, not impressed, not confused. Just processing. I eased the throttle slightly as the final cars approached, maintaining speed so the train would clear clean without hesitation. Procedure stays the same, no matter how loud the moment gets. The crossing lights began to slow their rhythm as the end of the train neared, the system already preparing to reset. Linda kept talking, her gestures sharper now, almost pleading without admitting it. The officer finally raised a hand, not aggressive, just enough to pause her. He looked at the chain, then at the bent gate, then up at the signal lights still flashing above them. He said something short. Linda's face changed again. Not anger this time. Something closer to realization. I watched from the cab as the last car rolled past the crossing, the coupler clanking once before the line cleared completely. The bells began to wind down, their urgency fading into a hollow echo. The officer stepped closer to Linda, his voice firmer now, and reached for his notepad as the crossing gate tried to reset against the chain she had locked in place. The last car cleared the crossing and the rails settled back into silence, a low ticking sound replacing the thunder that had filled the air seconds before. I eased the throttle down and secured the controls, eyes still tracking the mirrors as the train moved fully beyond the road. The crossing lights dimmed to black, but the gate did not lift. The chain held it in place, twisted and tight, resisting the reset like a mistake that refused to disappear. I keyed the radio and confirmed the line was clear, my voice steady, routine, even as the scene outside shifted into something else. The response came back with a short acknowledgement and a note that the incident was already flagged. That word lingered. Flagged meant reviewed. Reviewed meant consequences. I stepped down from the cab, boots hitting the gravel again, the heat from the locomotive fading behind me as I walked back toward the crossing. The smell of hot metal mixed with the faint scent of asphalt and exhaust. Linda stood near the gate now, her posture smaller, her phone lowered, her voice no longer carrying beyond the few feet around her. The officer had his notepad open, pen moving in short, precise strokes. He was not rushing. He did not need to. He asked a question. Linda answered quickly, her words overlapping, pointing again at the sign she had planted near the crossing, the glossy letters catching the weak morning light. Private crossing. The officer glanced at it, then at the signal mast above, then down at the chain binding the gate. His pen moved again. He asked another question. Slower this time. Linda hesitated before answering. That was new. The second officer approached the gate and examined the chain, giving it a light pull, testing the tension, the way someone does when they already know the answer. He looked back at his partner and gave a small nod. No words. Just confirmation. Around them, drivers had stepped out of their cars, keeping a respectful distance, watching the exchange unfold. No one was honking now. No one was yelling. The energy had shifted from frustration to quiet observation. People understand authority when they see it applied correctly. I stopped a few yards from the crossing and rested my hand on the control cabinet again, the metal cool now, grounded. The officer with the notepad closed it halfway and looked directly at Linda, his tone firmer, measured. He gestured toward the tracks, then toward the chain, then toward her vehicle still angled across the road. Each point landed. Each one narrowed her space. Linda tried to respond, but her voice did not rise this time. It stayed low, controlled, almost careful, like she was choosing words instead of throwing them. That was the second shift. The first was when the train appeared. The second was now, when the system answered back. I watched as the officer asked for identification. Linda reached into her bag, hands not as steady as before, pulling out her wallet and handing over her license. The officer took it, glanced at it, and wrote something else down. The second officer spoke into his shoulder mic, relaying details, likely tying her name to the incident log that had already started forming the moment she locked that chain. I could hear fragments of it through the static. Location. Obstruction. Active line. That combination carries weight. Linda looked at the chain again, then at the bent gate, then at me, her expression searching for something that was not there anymore. Not control. Not approval. Just process. I reached down and unlatched the cabinet, pulling out the bolt cutters we kept for maintenance access, the steel jaws catching the light as I stepped closer to the gate while the officer turned slightly toward me. I stepped closer to the gate, the bolt cutters heavy in my hand, the steel jaws catching the flashing red reflection still fading from the signal lights. The officer nearest me shifted his stance slightly, not stopping me, just watching, making sure the next move stayed inside procedure. Linda saw the cutters and took a half step forward, her hand lifting like she was about to object, but she stopped herself. That hesitation said more than anything she had shouted earlier. The chain hung tight across the gate, twisted from the pressure, links strained but still holding. I set the cutters around one of the links and paused for a second, letting the moment settle. Around us, the air felt different now. Quieter. Focused. The kind of quiet that comes after something has already been decided. The officer gave a small nod. That was all the clearance I needed. I pressed down on the handles. The metal gave with a sharp crack, loud enough to echo across the stopped cars. The tension released instantly. The chain slackened and dropped against the post with a hollow clink. The gate shifted, then slowly lifted back into position, resetting itself like nothing had ever been there. Systems do that. They correct when you remove what does not belong. Linda watched the chain fall, her eyes following it to the ground like it carried the last piece of control she had left. The officer stepped forward then, closing the distance, his tone calm but firm as he spoke to her again. I did not need to hear every word. I could see it in her posture. Shoulders drawn in. Chin lowered. She answered, but not the way she had before. No pointing. No commanding. Just short replies. The second officer moved toward her SUV, glancing at the position of the vehicle across the crossing, then back at his partner. Another note taken. Another detail locked in. I stepped back from the gate and rested the cutters against the cabinet, wiping my hands on my vest out of habit. The drivers began to move again, slowly at first, engines turning over, tires rolling forward as the road reopened. No one rushed. They watched her as they passed, a few shaking their heads, a few saying nothing at all. That kind of silence carries weight. Linda looked up once, meeting my eyes for a brief second. There was no anger left in it. Just calculation. Like she was trying to figure out where she had lost the line. The answer was simple. She never had it. The officer handed her something small, a folded slip of paper, and explained something in a measured tone. Linda took it, fingers tightening slightly around the edges. Her phone stayed at her side now, forgotten. The glossy sign she had placed near the crossing leaned slightly in the dirt, the words private crossing catching the light in a way that felt almost ironic. The second officer returned to the cruiser and spoke into the radio again, likely closing out part of the call while opening another. This was not just a warning. That much was clear. I turned back toward the tracks, checking the signal mast one more time. Green now. Line clear. Everything back in order. Behind me, Linda said something again, a little louder this time, but the officer responded before it could grow into anything else. Short. Direct. Final. I could hear the tone even if I did not catch the words. I picked up the cutters and secured them back inside the cabinet, closing the latch with a solid click. When I looked back, the officer was guiding Linda a step away from the crossing, positioning her beside her vehicle as he continued speaking, his notepad open again, pen moving with steady precision. The officer's pen kept moving while Linda stood beside her SUV, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the paper in her hand like it might change if she stared hard enough. The morning traffic flowed again now, slow but steady, tires rolling over the crossing that had been locked minutes ago. Each car passed between her and the tracks without stopping, without asking. That part mattered. The crossing did not wait for permission anymore. It never had. The second officer circled the vehicle once, checking the position, then glanced toward the sign she had planted in the dirt. He stepped over, pulled it loose with one hand, and held it up for a second before setting it down beside the patrol car. No announcement. Just removal. Linda noticed that. Her eyes followed the sign like it was another piece of her authority being quietly set aside. The first officer spoke again, voice even, explaining something step by step. I could not hear every word, but I recognized the cadence. Clear. Final. No room for interpretation. Linda nodded once, then again, slower, like the motion itself cost something. She tried to speak, stopped, then tried again. This time her voice stayed low, controlled, almost careful. She pointed once toward the crossing, then toward the houses behind her, like she was trying to connect the two into something that still made sense. The officer listened, then shook his head once, not dismissive, just certain. That ended it. I leaned against the control cabinet, the metal cool against my back, and watched the rest of it play out. The signal mast stood green now, steady and quiet, like nothing unusual had happened. That was the part most people never see. The system resets fast. It does not carry emotion. It just records, adjusts, and moves forward. A pickup truck rolled through the crossing and slowed for a second as it passed Linda, the driver giving a short look before continuing on. No words. Just acknowledgement. The second officer returned to his partner and handed over the sign, speaking briefly. They both glanced at it, then at Linda, then back at the crossing. Another note went down. The paper in Linda's hand shifted as she tightened her grip, the edges bending slightly under her fingers. She looked down at it, then back up at the officer, her expression searching for something that was not there anymore. Not agreement. Not negotiation. Just process. The officer closed his notepad and stepped back half a pace, giving her space but not releasing the moment. He gestured toward her vehicle, then toward the open road ahead. Linda hesitated, then nodded again, slower this time, and moved toward the driver's side door. The motion was deliberate, controlled, like she was trying to regain something in the way she walked. She opened the door and paused, one hand resting on the frame, looking back once more at the crossing, the tracks, the cabinet, and finally at me. That look stayed a second longer than the others. Not defiant. Not apologetic. Just aware. The officers stepped aside as she got in, one of them speaking a final sentence through the open window. She listened without interrupting. Then she nodded once more and pulled the door closed. The engine started, low and steady, and she eased the vehicle forward, clearing the crossing the same way everyone else had. No special path. No control. Just movement through something that had already decided its own rules. The patrol car lights dimmed as the officers returned to their cruiser, one of them placing the sign carefully in the back seat before closing the door. I stayed by the cabinet as the patrol car idled for a moment longer, its engine low and steady, then the lights faded completely and the cruiser pulled away down the road. The crossing stood open now, clean, unobstructed, the gate fully reset like the interruption had never happened. Traffic moved normally again, cars passing through without hesitation, each one following the same path Linda had tried to control. I checked the signal mast one more time. Solid green. Line clear. The rails had gone quiet, just a faint ticking sound left behind from the cooling steel. That sound always lingers longer than people expect. It is the system settling back into itself. I opened the control cabinet and ran a quick inspection, fingers moving across switches and relays out of habit, confirming everything had cycled correctly after the obstruction. No faults. No alarms. Just a clean reset. That part mattered more than anything she had said earlier. The system does not care about opinions. It only records what happened and responds accordingly. A few of the drivers who had stopped earlier slowed as they passed, glancing toward the cabinet, toward the tracks, then forward again. No one needed an explanation. They had seen enough. I stepped back and closed the cabinet, the latch clicking into place with a solid, final sound. The kind that tells you something is done. The sign the officer removed was gone now, leaving only a small patch of disturbed. Dirt where it had been planted. That detail stayed with me longer than I expected. Temporary things always leave marks when they are forced into permanent systems. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint smell of diesel away from the crossing and replacing it with something cleaner, lighter. The morning moved on like it always does. I walked a few steps along the ballast and looked down the line where the train had disappeared, the track stretching out straight and quiet again. No sign of what had just happened except the memory of it. That is how most of these moments end. Fast, clean, almost invisible once they are over. But not everywhere. Some things stay recorded. Some things follow you back. I turned and looked toward the neighborhood entrance, where Linda's SUV had disappeared minutes earlier. The road there curved slightly, lined with trimmed hedges and matching mailboxes, everything controlled, measured, approved. At least it used to be. I reached into my vest and pulled out the radio again, scrolling through the log channel activity. The incident had already been tagged with a case number. That meant review. That meant follow-up. It also meant the crossing would not be just a crossing to them anymore. It would be a report. A file. A reference point. I clipped the radio back into place and rested my hand on the cabinet one last time, feeling the solid weight of it under my palm. Systems like this do not raise their voice. They do not argue. They just move, record, and correct. Linda had stepped into something she thought she could manage. What she actually touched was a line that does not bend for anyone. I took a slow breath and looked down the track again, the quiet stretching out in front of me like nothing had ever been there at all. But the log would tell a different story, and it had already been sent up the chain.